it works. Good.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect.
Does anyone have any question before we start? We go live.
No.
No?
Oh, all good.
Big fan of Ashby, by the way. We Chloe, my colleague's been chatting with you guys, Benji.
Nice.
Yeah.
Which companies have you been working with?
So I mean, from EQT Ventures, we just chatted with, and I think Chloe was. No, I haven't followed up with her on the latest. What's happened there? So I actually don't have the last snoop on this one, but she was talking very highly of you guys. We chatted about you. We had like a little deep dive a few months back.
Nice, appreciate it. Yeah, the VC talent partners have been really helpful with getting the word up. Especially, I don't know, you're a little bit more early stage, is that right? Yeah. So that's usually it's a good stage to get involved and try to build a solid foundation.
We're fans of Ashby as well. So if you need any sort of feedback on our experience, then feel free to reach out. I think you're building a good game-changing set of tools.
Appreciate it. Still a lot to do. I'm still not happy with it, but I'm glad other people like it. 2 more minutes.
How boring it would be if it was all done.
Yeah, that is true. There's always room for improvement. And I also wouldn't want it. We use it ourselves a lot. We obviously hire a lot ourselves, and I would not want to use any other product anymore. So at least it's reached that level, but there's a lot of things to be improved.
All right, everyone. I'll turn off my mic and my camera now because we're about to start. And anything you need, you can text me or talk to me on the chat. And yeah, have a great event. I'm very excited.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I assume I just click on it at 6. So less than a minute.
Final countdown.
Yeah.
Will you give a few minutes for people to join in, like a couple of minutes, because not everyone will click exactly at 6, right?
Yeah, I think just a couple of minutes, and while we introduce ourselves, people will start joining, and then we kick off with the questions. I will also speak briefly about what is Talking Talent, just a line of intro about Accelerate. So I think that should give enough time and not have that awkward moment.
Absolutely.
Where, can you hear me?
Awesome.
Great. So are you all ready?
Yes.
We're ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Wait, now I cannot click on it. All right, I think we're live now. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and also welcome to today's Talking Talent. And today we will speak about a very interesting topic, and I believe also top of mind. We will be speaking all about sustainable hiring and how to build long-lasting talent teams in 2022. We have very exciting speakers today from Ashby, Hotjar, Automatic, and EQT Ventures. So get comfortable, grab a snack, grab a drink or coffee for some of you, and let's kick off. First, I'd love to introduce myself as your host today. I would also like to explain to you what is Accelerate and what is Talking Talent. So my name is Marianne. I'm an embedded talent partner at Accelerate. I've been here for a year already, and my role is to help scale-ups and startups build their teams. I have been embedded in already a few projects, and it has been a really good opportunity to bring impact from within besides the hires. So essentially, this is what we do at Accelerate. We help startups and scale-ups grow, and we do so by different services. So we have our embedded recruitment service. We also have our X team specialized in executive search. And we also recently launched our new product, Connect, which allows you to source people and source exceptional talent in a way easier format. So I invite you to check that out. And then about Talking Talent, this is a space we've created for all of us who are very involved and very interested in the talent acquisition space. Essentially, this is a community where we can all exchange knowledge, share our experiences, share our best practices, and continue learning from one another. For today, we will introduce our speakers first of all. We will do a quick round for everyone to let us know a little bit of what they do and their backgrounds. Then we will ask our panelists a few questions to drive the discussion forward. And by the end, we will have a Q&A. So all of you, please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box that you will have. And in case we don't have time to answer all of your questions, we will also invite you to our new Talking Talent platform, where we can continue our discussions after today's session. So welcome all, and let's get started. Thank you all of you to come today, and I would love to hear a little bit of what is your background and yeah, what you will be bringing up today. So we can start with a quick intro from Mia.
Absolutely. Nice to see everyone. Well, hear everyone soon. I'm Mia, and I'm at EQT Ventures at the moment. I've been working in the sort of early tech space for the past couple of years in Berlin, based in Berlin at the moment, originally from Finland. And I'm super passionate about this area. I think there's so much to uncover and dig deeper. So very curious about today and what the rest of my participants are gonna uncover.
Thank you, Mia. And Benji, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Benji. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ashby. We are building new software in the recruiting space that's really focused on operationally minded recruiting teams. My background before this, I was a director of engineering and spent a lot of time recruiting and ran into a lot of pain points with tools back then that I feel weren't quite built for how recruiting happens today. My personal background, I grew up in Germany. I'm now in San Francisco, and I've been running Ashby for 3.5 years. And we've been working with a lot of high growth tech companies and have been seeing how they have managed kind of the different cycles in the last 2 to 3 years with the recruiting team. So very excited about this topic today.
Thanks for joining us. And Carol.
Yes. So hi, everyone. I'm Carol. I'm currently with Hotjar as the Director of Talent Acquisition. So overseeing all areas of TA from tech, commercial, employer branding, ops, intelligence, and so on. Before that, I was the global head of tech TA HelloFresh. Before that, with ThoughtWorks, some other smaller companies, consultancies, B2B, B2C, SaaS. So I look very young, but I'm actually already have almost 15 years of experience. Love talent acquisition. I've been very involved on headcount planning, calculating capacity for talent acquisition, building new functions. So I'm really excited just to share what I have learned and also learn from the other panelists. So thank you for the invite and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. And Nitin, let us know about you.
Hi, so I'm Nitin. I'm the Director of Talent Operations at Automatic. For those of you that haven't heard Automatic before, it's a company that are the creators of WordPress. So if you ever wanted to launch a website or a blog, you would use WordPress, or if you wanted to start a business, you would use WooCommerce, which is one of our products. Our goal is to make the web a better place, and we've been a distributed company since 2005, so lots of experience working remotely, and my role in talent operations looks after the talent infrastructure, so making sure that we have the right tools, the right people, the right processes, that we are enabled to scale well and hire really well. And yeah, this is a topic that's been in our mind as well. So I'm very looking forward to the discussion today, sharing my points, my views on this, and seeing what the others have to say. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nitin. And yeah, absolutely. I think today's topic, sustainable hiring, is something we can all relate to in a way. I think in the past couple of years, we've seen these very sudden shifts in the market and in the talent acquisition industry. Remember when we all of a sudden had to go into lockdown and the COVID was heavily impacting our businesses. Then there was a rise in the economy and we saw all of these startups and scale-ups and companies hiring again quickly and even aggressively. And now we again see a shift where things are different again, and where on one side we've companies that are still scaling regardless of the challenges that we have in today's crisis or recession. And also on the other side, companies that have had to either paused or stopped their hiring plans and then had the need to see how can they still have a sustainable strategy for their talent teams. So to get warmed up, I would like to ask you, how do you decide when and how to grow your talent team? Does anyone want to jump in?
I can start sharing a little bit. I know that I think Mia will want to complement as well. I think everything starts with staff planning or headcount planning. I know there's a scary word for a lot of companies, and it's super hard to get it right. There are very, very few softwares out there that will help you plan that. So I feel a lot is still done in spreadsheets, but you need to have, even if it's on a piece of paper, I don't care where, you need to understand what the company is hiring for. And you need to understand, is it a sprint or is it a marathon, right? Are you looking into building your end team in a year's time, and then the hiring will be mostly maintaining what you have? Or do you have a plan to have a sustainable growth? We aim to have 20% net growth on our headcount year on year. So I think that's the first thing, is around the numbers and the time frame that these numbers need to happen. And then another layer from there is just understanding, what does this roles look like, right? Are they very senior specialized leadership positions? Are you looking to hire bulk for new departments like customer success and sales and finance? So I think just putting a little bit of a story behind that is probably where you want to start deciding, right? I will not start moving anything on talent acquisition teams until I'm at least 70% confident that the headcount planning is correct and it's what's going to happen. 100% confidence on headcount planning is unrealistic nowadays. So I would just shoot, like, if you're 70% confident and your C-level and your execs in your company are also confident with this plan, then you can probably start, deciding.
I love that very, very sober approach, because it's so easy to get sort of throw out there and let's just build, let's move forward and throw stuff around. I love that kind of intentionality, really, about who do you want to even be as an organization, maybe even peeling it back, not going too philosophical, but just really what kind of organization do you want to be? And, besides the facts of where's your funding at, where's your, product, what type of product you are, all these kind of foundational questions, and really spending some time talking through that with leadership and sort of your founding team even, to get really intentional about making these decisions. Once that foundation is set, it's so much harder to reverse back and become something else. You're building a house somehow, or something more dynamic than that, but get the foundations right and start thinking about what your supporting functions are, what your talent team could look like from there.
Nice. I definitely agree with both, and we see it across our customers. I'd say try to answer two questions here separately. The when part, definitely strongly agree that it's really based on a headcount plan and how you expect to grow the team in the short term. And then there may be some considerations, like, for example, for us, we have a strong focus on always wanting to hire very strong engineering talent. And so we want to have some baseline support independent of any hiring plan for that. But the hiring plan is a big input in when do we add different people to a team. And we help our customers there. Small plug for the product, but we do have a capacity planner in the product today. And that has been really helpful for kind of taking historical data and looking at roughly, how many screens do we need to make for this kind of role. And I think customers are starting to do that better and better, kind of using the historical inputs as they have them. And then the how piece, really hard to answer in general, because it really depends on the types of roles you want to hire for, how involved your hiring team can be. And I think I want to touch on that a little bit later, where I think one interesting angle you can take to flex the size of the talent team a little bit more is getting more engagement across other teams to participate in hiring activities. But I'll stop here before I ramble too much.
Yeah, I'd agree with everyone, with what everyone has said, really. I think the most logical exercise is to do a headcount plan. If you don't do that, strongly advise you to do that. And it should reflect not only the reality of today, but at least a 6-month view, because as Carolina was mentioning, it's very hard to make that set in stone. So you need to have something fairly fluid, but sometimes businesses just don't understand what a headcount plan is. So, as talent leaders, we have to educate leadership teams on what does that mean, and then when you do that exercise, you start visualizing how the organization is going to grow, and then you will know how much you need to hire in your talent team. But yeah, you need to answer, how much is the headcount going to grow by? Is it going to be a 2x growth? Is it going to be a 5x growth? If it's a 5x growth, it's super aggressive. And then you should look at, the capacity of your existing talent capabilities. How many recruiters do you have? What teams are there in? And is that currently set up to deliver that number? And if not, that's, I think, the starting point where we should start hiring and think about who is it that you need and where. Do you need more tech recruiters? Do you need more commercial recruiters? Do you need more sources? I think just to chime in there, that's the best way.
Thank you for sharing all of your points of view. I think you already started ahead with the next question, but what do you think have been the main challenges that you've encountered when you've had to define that growth and the ways to do that? Maybe Nitin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges, it's that we were in a super competitive market. And I think between 2021 and 2022, finding recruiters has been the hardest thing. I don't know if the panel agrees here, but finding good recruiters is extremely hard. You might have recruiters working at great companies and hiring at great brands, might understand the type of talent audience you want to hire, but they might not pass your process. I think one of my personal challenges just in general has been finding good recruiters, because I think recruiters, apart from doing the delivery piece, it's about how do you do business partnering really well, and how can you work with your stakeholder group really well, and how can you drive operational efficiencies in that group. So I think that's been a particular challenge. And another challenge has been that it's just a remote market right now. There's more companies that are offering remote, so that's not a value proposition anymore. So how do you continue to differentiate there? How do you stand out? And usually candidates nowadays are in more than one process. It's rare to find candidates that are only talking to one company. So you intentionally know that you have to be super fast in your process. You have to assess them the right way. You have to have a great candidate experience. So those are two particular challenges that I faced. And one final one I can think of is that a lot of companies have overhired. There's been a tendency of overhiring because hiring seems to be the solution to every problem. And it's kind of a striking balance. You want to hire for what you need, because if otherwise you hire too quickly, you might have to lay them off super quickly as well. And we're starting to see that with some big techs, right? Their headcount increased more than the revenue increased, and as a result, now they have to lay off people. So those are three things I've observed today.
Thanks for sharing, Nitin. And Mia, do you relate to these challenges? Do you have any other challenges that you've encountered?
Totally, in the sense of maybe peeling it back to something very basic, which I think in very early stage, challenges of building a talent team or working in people and talent and the general process of the 0 to 1. I feel like saying no as a challenge to, I know that's very broad, that would apply to many areas, but also in people and talent initiatives or hiring, saying no, what Nitin also said, the sort of over hiring, and it's always an answer to hire. I don't know, actually. I don't think so. I think it's very, very powerful to be able to say no in the right places, and walk away from something, even if you feel like, the sunken cost fallacy, you've spent time recruiting, doing the whole process, interviewing, whatnot, just really not getting tempted to just kind of fast and not that intentionality that I mentioned in the beginning as well. So I think saying no is an incredibly hard challenge. As simple as is.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but so 2 out of 3 notes for this question, and 2 have already been covered. It's definitely hard to hire recruiters, especially strong recruiters in this market. I think that's still true. And then also, yes, the need to be able to push back on kind of unrealistic hiring goals. I think another thing that we see, especially of companies are really growing aggressively, 50 to 100% or more year over year, is that there's kind of just a lag between plan being built and then being able to build the recruiting team to support that headcount plan. It's just really hard for businesses to think far enough ahead to build the underlying team. And so the companies we see do it at best, they try to think, even 2 years up. to start to get a little bit of a head start on like building the right foundation. That oftentimes is like the plan is made in Q3 and then you want to start executing in Q1 of next year, but you don't have the team in place yet and you miss all of your hiring goals. You kind of start behind. So
exactly. Benji, you were talking before about using the metrics, right? I think when you look at the time it takes between opening a job and closing a job, right? Let's say it's 4 months. It takes the same time to hire a recruiter, right? So to open the job, interview, hire someone, wait for the notice period, they get started and they need to get onboarded. It takes another 30 days to warm up a pipeline and find the first candidates. So if you think about, I need to build a recruitment team from scratch, or I need X amount of recruiters on top of what I already have, you also need to calculate the lead time. So sometimes that ends up being 6 months or even 8 months, because it's 8 months of opening the recruiter job, the recruiter starting, plus another 4 months of the recruiter finding someone and that someone starting, right? So I agree with saying no partially. I think nothing is impossible, right? You want 1,000 people in a month? Fine, that's how much it's gonna cost. That's how much it's gonna stress your interviewing teams. Is everyone in the company ready to completely drop everything that they're doing to just interview and review tasks? Is the company ready to spend maybe 3 million in a month to work with agencies, RPOs, and freelancers? So I think the no, it's not a no. I think the no is, yes, it's possible, but this is the effort and this is the cost it's going to take you. Are you ready? No, it needs to be half. Okay, so if I have half of the resources, this is what I can do. And I think another way to look at the say no and the pushing back is, I don't know, what is the top 30% of the roles in this headcount planning that if we don't fill this year, or if we don't fill on the deadline needed, they're not going to break the business, right? Is it 20% of your finance team? Is it 20% of your legal team? Can the data science team wait until next year? So I think there's a way to say no. And I really like this question is, what is the bottom of your headcount plan, right? What is the top? What is the priority? The roles that if we don't hire, we're screwed, right? Let's start hiring there. Let's start setting up the recruitment team to fill those first. And then what is the bottom part, right? Maybe the bottom part will be self-service. The hiring managers will do the process. We're not going to do sourcing for those roles, or we're not going to do screening calls for those roles. So I think the no, it can come with a lot of flavors, but I really like to present the cost and effort, right? We're not going to work on anything else, recruitment, but engineers are not going to do anything else. They're not going to touch code. They're just going to review tasks, and they're just going to do interviews 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Are you ready for that? The answer is always no. And then that's where you start the conversation, right? Okay, if that's not possible from your end, because from my end, I can spend money on hire agencies, then what can we do here to meet halfway, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. Would anyone like to add something to that?
I guess it's just a general comment. I think it's also something you touched on, Carol. It's very hard for talent functions also not to become reactive but you all touched on this with the whole thing of like planning a bit ahead and not expecting someone to start within a month if you open a role. And I feel like it's such a challenge to see again and again, like even if you start off with great intentions, but somehow the kind of org can very quickly become very reactive. I don't know if Benji, you know, in your customer calls, have you noticed anything like that, or people talking about that?
About becoming reactive to, yeah, I mean, it definitely happens a lot, and it depends really on oftentimes the maturity or seniority of the leader on the talent side, and how comfortable they are to have these conversations. I think earlier stage when the talent function is still maturing, we definitely see wrong expectations being set, I'd say, of like, you know, how many roles can actually be managed in parallel, how many P0 roles can we have, can it be like kind of like 50% of our roles be P0. And I think what we do see there is like talent teams sometimes get into a bind where they're like spending a little bit of time on like a lot of different roles, aren't making a lot of progress, and kind of lose a little bit of standing with the organization. So that's definitely a problem when the talent team is not super actively involved in kind of building out that hiring plan. At a later stage, I think there are different challenges, mostly around just scaling the actual recruiting team. We saw last year some pretty crazy things like Robinhood buying entire talent agencies to like bring in like 20 plus recruiters at once. That kind of try to solve for that, but different challenges at different ends of the spectrum. But yeah, don't know if I actually answered your question. Maybe.
Totally. No, it's just interesting to hear from your perspective.
Great, thank you. We can move forward. I believe this is my favorite question of all of them. What kind of adjustments do you think should be made to keep a hiring strategy sustainable, especially during these times?
I have a few things. I'll just add one and then I'll come back maybe later. But to extend on what Kara said earlier, I do think it's very, very helpful to have kind of like scenario planning in place and be like, not this is like our definitive headcount plan. Sometimes you have it on the revenue side. You may have like an excellent plan, an okay plan, and like a must meet plan. And I think that's a really, really great way to start, because then you can plan around that. And that, yeah, I'll add a few more things later, but that I think is a helpful strategy to use.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think if otherwise it just looks that talent teams are always behind their hiring plan, and I hear that happen a lot. That it feels that the talent team is not delivering, but you are actually delivering. And to Carolina's point, maybe it's 30% of that hiring plan that's super, super critical. So just focus on those, and then everything else, just do a priority 1, priority 2. But when you ask those hard questions, you realize that the hiring plan is actually in criticality wise smaller than what the business thinks it is. So yeah, just wanted to support that point.
Actually, yeah, on the same vein, I guess it's also, I feel like a lot of talent functions are very often weak on sort of being data driven from the get-go, and having, even like having like proper dashboards. It's crazy how a lot of like HR tools and ATSs have quite counterintuitive reporting and ability to kind of tweak the reporting and make sort of sense of what's going on in a funnel, and so much of that like sales funnel management essentially is in every other part of the org, very neatly dashed out with lots of dashboards, and for some reason the talent org sometimes escapes this rigor. So I feel like that would be something to go back and sort of really invest in, and not just reporting for reporting's sake. Like, it obviously needs to like give you some insight, and you need to decide what you actually want to find out by building any of these dashboards. But I feel like that's definitely a power move, a great leader should put in place.
Perfect plug for me. I won't talk too much about our product, but we do help a lot on the side. And I think we've seen a big change where there's still the maturity of talent teams still varies a lot. At a lower end, I think we see reporting mostly be used as a kind of cover my tracks kind of a thing. Like, the executive team is asking me to show me a number of reports, and they want to know what is like time to fill, what is some kind of trailing output metric, and then I put that together and send it off. That's like the baseline, and I think that's how it used to be. But then we do have a lot of our best customers use metrics to really look at things both in real time, but also to kind of forecast where things are heading if they're behind goals, and then really also ask like multi-step questions, right? So you can look at a graph and you can look at a number, but usually there's like multiple components under that. And that is something we see talent teams getting much better at, especially since there's now recruiting operations in place in more and more companies. Mm-hmm. So I think having that will help become a little bit more sophisticated around kind of the overall capacity model, and help with more sustainable hiring.
This is music to my ears. I 100% agree. I think there's no excuse anymore not to use data. There's so many systems out there that you can use to make these decisions and to forecast. One other thing that you brought up is you need to be a bit more creative as well on how you're putting your team together. So I feel often the tendency is to say, okay, each recruiter can close X amount of roles per month. That's it. Right, but you have so many other functions to make your team more diverse, right? You can include sourcers, employer branding specialists, community managers. You can have candidate experience specialist, talent intelligence, and operations person. So of course, depending on the size of the team and the maturity of the company, you need to start aggregating these other functions, because with the candidate experience specialist, you can save a lot of time. So meaning you might be able to close the candidate faster than the competition, right? So speed is everything. Then you have someone doing sourcing, which is helping you bring the really qualified candidates to the pipeline, so that you need to do less interviews to close the same amount of people. Hence, you free up the interviewer's time, right? And then you have an employer branding or community manager that is really helping you attract the right candidate. So your inbounds also have more quality. So I feel like we need to leave the mindset as quick as possible that we only need 360 talent partners, because we need the diversity, right? It's kind of when you're putting together an engineering squad, your front-enders, your back-enders, your mobile engineers, your designers, your product managers, you need the diversity on the TA team. So that's something that really, really helped us in the past.
I had a note somewhat related to this, and I'll let other people talk again. But I think when you think about like the sustainability of hiring, I think you can basically make investments, especially in time like now, that just make your process much more efficient going forward. And so the most inefficient way to hire is like you have no employer brand, you have very weak tools and very weak process, and you just throw a lot of recruiters at a problem that will lead to like you just need a lot of headcount to actually fill roles. But as Kara said, if you do like some investments, let's say for us, again, engineering hiring is a key aspect. We've invested in like content around engineering hiring from day one. And we start seeing the payoff of that more and more now, where we just get really good inbound candidates. And we just have to spend much less time sourcing candidates than some other companies that don't invest that. So there's like the employer brand in general, like how do you improve inbound for recruiting, similar to like how go-to-market teams try to really rely on inbound pretty heavily and not just on like outbound sales. And then the other part is the efficiency of the process and automation, anything you can put in place to just need fewer people to move the gears as candidates move through the process. And I won't talk about our product much more, but we tend to help with that quite a bit as well. And I think these are like the two things you can tweak to then, if you need to hire a lot more, just make it more efficient and need fewer additional headcount on the recruiting team.
I feel like there's also that I often talk about, I remember one of the first managers I ever had said hiring is like dating, which at the time I thought was hilarious, but then actually it stuck as an analogy, because I think there are actually some, as like the attraction piece and like knowing who you are as a company or as a person, you know, who you actually fit well with, all those things. I won't go into too much detail here, but it's just, I feel like when you talked about the employer branding and investing into that and like really getting people to pull in, that will also be like, that's a budget saving that you can do, because if you're not going out there throwing loads of headcount, actually it's hunting, which is of course one of the pillars, but kind of trying to even out those different candidate sources more so than just relying heavily on one and not like ignoring the rest to build something sustainable at the end of the day.
Yeah, one thing to add there is that sometimes companies just focus recruiters too much on the recruiting, so it's just about building pipelines. But to everyone's point here, you can do so much for a specific vertical. You know, you can do employee brand specific, tailored to engineering, and you know, making sure that the process is super lean and efficient for that particular vertical. So I think recruiters sometimes want to do more than just recruiting. So they want to improve processes, they want to improve your ATS setup, they want to improve collateral, go-to-market collateral. So I think whatever it is, just give them the opportunity to do that. I feel recruiters and talent teams also need to be more educated on data, and sometimes recruiters need to learn how to work with data and make decisions through data. And I think there's work to do there in educating what those core metrics mean, how can they be measured, and just giving more work to recruiters than just the recruiting part. I think that's a big part of sustainability and a big part of increasing the productivity of your team. Because recruiters are more than just people who hire. They're part sales, they're part marketing, they're part operations. They wear different hats. So you can use them in very different ways. It's just about knowing people's strengths and how to use them smartly in the business.
Yeah, actually, I actually really love that also what Carolina was saying earlier about the sort of different types of like being sensitive to the fact that like for a specific type of task, you might need somebody with a slightly different skill set, and having sort of understanding that it's not just like, I don't know, HR as a sort of generalist term that you just plonk on anyone who works with anything with people, but really getting into the nuances and the nitty gritty of like, you have different archetypes. And we do a lot of work with that actually with our PCs on our portfolio companies on, you know, trying to kind of bring in the nuances, like just like you would build a product team with the front end, the back end, etc. So why not apply the same logic to building a people or talent function, and that different people have different strengths, and you know, somebody might be a great storyteller, so maybe they can be someone in that part of the talent function, where they're actually heavy people contact and love wooing and all those skill sets that come with that, for example.
Fully agree. And some companies are slowing down on hiring, so it's a good opportunity to revisit those things and, you know, make their function ready for the next phase of growth, whenever that is. Because rather than laying off your recruiters, reallocate them, because I'm sure there's work to do. I'm sure there's dashboards to build. So I think there's definitely lots you can do in talent.
Yeah, that's definitely something we saw last year, where companies that had laid off recruiters at the beginning of COVID scrambled to hire them back. So I think there's definitely a little bit of short-sightedness where obviously in some cases the business has to make a tough decision. You just can't change that if your demand significantly changes. But I do think there are cases where the talent team could be used in a lull period to just lay the right foundation for a more busy period later on. And then the other thing we talked about a little bit is kind of this on the other side of like, how can you avoid having to grow the talent team very quickly if you have really aggressive hiring goals? I do think getting hiring managers more involved, the culture at different companies around that is very different for us as a company in the talent space. It's very critical that managers want to recruit and they can kind of flex. They obviously will not do as good of a job as a recruiter at every step of the funnel, but they can do quite a few things themselves and are very engaged in recruiting, and that can add bandwidth.
Yeah. With Hotjar, I was impressed actually how involved the hiring managers and interviewers are. I was like, never seen this before. But you can also, it's a cultural thing, but you can also create, for example, service levels, where you can say your priority roles have service level, max 1, whatever you want to call, where we have sourcing engagement, we have marketing campaigns, we have screening call for every single candidate. We're going to move them as quick as possible in the process, etc. Then level 2, we manage the applications, we do the interviews, you know, the post and pray. And then level 3, you know, it's not a priority position. We're going to set up the hiring manager for success. They can go through trainings. We set up the tool. We teach them how to review resumes. They can do the screening calls and call us back if you found someone that you like to make an offer together. Right. So I think this is something that's, it's an easy adjustment to make. And it's also very easy to explain to the business, you know.
Yeah.
If we don't want to overhire recruiters, then as Benji said, how can we use the team that we have? Because if you have 2,000 employees, potentially we have 2,000 recruiters, right? It's just a matter of, are they trained? Are they willing to do this? And do they understand that this is their job as well?
I love that. And I think it's like a fine balance where the best teams do this, but in some cases, the talent team is a little bit protective of their turf. And it's mostly because there's not the right enablement. And so they're kind of worried that hiring managers will mess things up. So I think pairing it with like the right enablement, I think it's a very powerful way to look at it. But I don't think it's done very frequently the way you described it. So I think it's a clever approach.
Maybe there's also sometimes that because of confusion around who actually then makes the final decision on a hire. I also noticed that's something that stalls. You know, you do all this work at the beginning, a process, etc. And then when it actually comes to like, do we take this person on board or not? Suddenly there's like either ghosting or panic or whatever. The end. This is such a, you know, do we date or do we not? The ultimate question. So I feel like that's also, I guess it's a process question, but I think it comes back to like, what were your foundations? Were you intentional enough about like who you want to be and who you need, and doing all that kind of groundwork before even kicking off and doing all the schnaz fancy stuff. And
I think we're bleeding into the next question, but I don't know if we are.
For sure. Yeah, we're still on time. this is why you can feel free to add more points to it. But thank you for adding all of these very interesting solutions, alternatives to the challenges that we've mentioned before. So next, and actually our last question for today, what is one piece of advice that you would give to leaders to become crisis proof and to continue being sustainable when growing and when hiring? Carol, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I can kick off. I think the main advice I would give here is just a lot of communication. We've been talking about it, just get involved on headcount planning. I feel headcount planning is sometimes a hot potato that everyone keeps passing around. Oh, it's the HR job, it's the leadership job, it's the C-level. We should have a specialist to do workforce planning. Doesn't matter. As TA leaders, you need to be there. And if no one is owning it, I would advise you to pick it up until someone can own it, because the person who's going to suffer the most is you, right? So yes, it can be owned by other functions and you can participate, you can advise and partner, but if there is no ownership, just take it to yourself. Create a spreadsheet, buy a tool, whatever it takes. Can be something simple, but have a source of truth where you have the list of wanted positions. And then on top of that, a mistake that we do is that we forget to calculate forecasted churn. The more you grow the business, the more you need to hire just to backfill. So I would highly advise just looking at what is the trend of churn and turnover in the company and add this on top, because often people forget that net growth is one thing, but if you already have a very large business, big portion of your hiring is just backfilling. And there is so much turnover in tech nowadays. Some companies are 25, 30%. So this is something that we need to take into consideration. So I would advise just take ownership of this if no one else in your company is doing that, and find a cadence to review this with your senior stakeholders every 2 weeks, every month. Just sit down. What has been the progress? Has the priority changed? What are we looking at in the next 2 to 3 months? Just keep on top of this. Just don't sit and wait for you to say you need to hire 10 people. Just get ahead of yourselves. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nitin, what do you think about that? And what would be your one piece of advice?
I think that's great advice. I think I would also add to that point is just to push back. If you feel the hiring plan isn't realistic and you feel you've got the data to support it, just push back and help your leadership and the team understand that this specific ask is not realistic. And so we have to revisit our hiring plan, because you don't want to say yes and then set the talent team up for failure. You know, when you report at the end of the year, your progress and your metrics. So I would really just push back, continue to manage expectations. As Carolina said, keep this as an exercise that talent owns, because ultimately it affects the talent team the most, good things or bad. So yeah, just continued effort on the hiring plan and try and automate it. If you can automate it, it would be awesome, because there's so many spreadsheets, so many people, you've got finance teams involved, you've got all sorts of over engineering going in these spreadsheets, and it's hard to look at. I sometimes look at them and I feel, wow, there's so much here, right? So I think this is a problem for all of us, how to automate your headcount plan, and hopefully Benji, you can find a solution to that, because that would be awesome.
Only partially. It's a part of technology problem. The way I read this question was more like leaders in general, so I'm not going to answer it for like talent leaders, but just like leaders of a company, executives, all of that. I'm generally also not a huge fan of advice, because it's hard to give blanket advice in most cases. But I think one thing that we culturally try to do, and I see a lot of companies reconsider now, is like being very diligent about the headcount they want to add. We talked about this a couple of ways, but one is looking at the actual priority of like, if we don't make these hires, are we going to miss our plan? Are we going to somehow like hurt the business? And then there are a lot of other hires where they're probably nice to have. And so really being honest about must have and nice to have. And I think the role of leadership there is to set a default of like, actually, we should try to figure out what we can do with the existing team. And if we prove that we can't, then we should add more people. So just changing the mindset a little bit around how to think about adding talent to the team. And I think that also allows maintaining a really high talent bar. And I think that's something that also suffered a little bit last year, where these goals were set out, and then recruiting teams in some cases felt the need to push through hires to hit these goals. And the time in the market for filling a role just gives you the opportunity to see better talent. And so I think really prioritizing these, being honest about where to add people, and then running with a more conservative must-have plan is probably the main thing that I would advise.
I also looked at the question a bit more sort of generally, but I guess like one top of mind thing that came to mind from what you guys spoke is also like, once you have that talent on board, I guess it's also as you're growing your organization and the culture shapes through this new talent that you have in, I feel like there's also that critical point of like, what are you willing to let go of now that you have not everything, but I think again, being like really intentional about like what kind of culture you're shaping with that new fresh talent that you brought on board, and that they will have an effect on whatever teams and however large they are. Even one person, they do matter, and being really intentional about, you know, what maybe do we let go now that we're from X to Y, or whatever the growth stage and speed you're at. These questions come up. I think something to prepare you in crisis proofing yourself from being disappointed, or I don't know, not even recognizing the organization you suddenly have in front of you because you didn't take time to sort of think through a few of these culture aspects of hiring too.
Yeah. One thing to add there that I also think is interesting. Sorry, did I interrupt someone?
Please go,
Benji. Then I'll let you go. But kind of think about like, what do you just triggered for this like what do you let go of question? But there are kind of certain types of roles in an organization where if you add someone, you're taking scope away from someone else, or you're splitting scopes and ownership. And for these roles, you have to be really thoughtful. It's like, if we add this person, like what is someone else going to not do going forward? There's some roles where it's less relevant, like account executives usually work pretty isolated. They have a number, you can add them in and you can track their performance pretty easily. But for some other roles, you're kind of splitting up scope across the company more and more. And a lot of companies that aren't super thoughtful around how does ownership change and what is the scope of each of these new roles we're adding, there ends up being a lot of redundancy. And so it's just another way to think about, like, you know, if we add this person, what is the job of the person that was doing this until now, and how does that change? And if you're doing this like as a 6 months out view, you'll probably find some roles that maybe don't make sense in the hiring plan after all, when you shift all these priorities around. But I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but
it does. Exactly. It does a lot. It's what I was thinking about before, right? What is the bottom 30%, 40%, 20%, whatever, right? Define a bottom you want to work with, and then ask the hiring managers and this X, okay, this bottom part, what it will look like, right? It's impossible that you have a list of 200 jobs and they all have the same level of importance. I find it very hard to believe. So there is an answer. You might just need to push it. I'm thinking as well, like crisis proof for the own talent acquisition team. I think sometimes you need to spend money to save money. So I would also recommend to look at having a full-time team, and then you have a flexible side, right? So the flexible can be, you have a team of freelancers, you have like a small network of freelancers that come and go to work with you. You have your RPOs, you have, I don't know, sourcers, or you have a different referral bonus. Maybe you implement something around, we're going to pay referral bonus to candidates that refer other candidates. So I think there are other ways as well where you spend a little bit more right now, but you get through that hiring sprint, the allegedly or real hyper growth that is going to be needed. But if that doesn't materialize, you can downsize the recruitment team without necessarily hurting an internal team or without having to fire folks. So I always like to work with flexible, also because this flexible model brings you so much freshness, right? It's someone that has worked with other clients. They have seen other things they can pick up really quickly. Onboarding is really fast, right? So having a team of internal permanent and a small portion of this team being like this flexible model, being very creative with using whatever is on the market to support you. I think that's also like a good way. Maybe it's a bit more expensive on the short term, but on the long term, it can really, really pay out.
It's also leveraging some like experts from externally who can build up some guidelines that you can then train internally, etc. I really love that.
Exactly. Every time you work with a different agency, they bring a different perspective. You know, they'll bring good market data points. They have done these roles before for your competitors, so they can get onboarded really quickly as well, right? So I would also recommend to look into that. Don't be afraid to spend a little bit more now to save in the future and protect your own talent team.
Yeah, I agree. Especially also for specialized roles, or sometimes specialized sources that are just really good at filling a certain type of role that may not make sense to bring on full-time onto the team. So definitely see that used a lot.
Nice. Thank you everyone for adding those points into the conversation. I think all super valid and very, very practical insights. And to be mindful of the time, let's head into our Q&A. We have just a few questions, so I would invite everyone, if there is something on your mind, please add it to the Q&A box. We will start with the first question we have here. This is a person who joined the recruiting industry during COVID. So everything this person has seen has been on a fully remote basis. So this person is interested in how do you see the remote-based changes impacting recruitment in the long run?
I can just throw one thing in briefly, but I think one relatively obvious thing that we've seen is just the pace of the process being significantly faster, because I think simply because people are able to take interviews at different times, more spread out, so that you don't have to travel to like an office and spend a whole day there and take time off. So people on the market and interviewing, they move through the process very, very quickly. So we just have to see. That's the biggest immediate obvious thing I've seen.
Yeah.
Just to add, go on, sorry, Carolina.
I was gonna mention you because you said that your company is fully remote since 2000, very early on. I think, and you mentioned now remote companies are now competitive, are not as competitive as they used to be. Yeah, maybe they are a little bit less competitive because they're more. Still find that a lot of companies are very resistant of going remote. So if this resistance keeps going on, I do think these companies will not be. Then the hybrid or inflexible, you need to be at the office. I think these companies are going to lose a lot of power to hire. Because I still feel, even though remote is not like the biggest differentiator, it's still like not every company is doing that. So remote companies are still taking a lot of advantage over companies that are being inflexible.
Yeah, I think we see that, in the application answers when we just asked them what attracted you to Automatic. I mean, one component is that they like the company's mission, but another part is that people want fully remote, and if they don't get it, they know they've got options. And yeah, Automatic and a few other companies just capitalize that fully, which in a way is good for us. But I think to Benji, you make a good point, is that speed of the process is faster, but also the speed in which decisions are made internally is faster. So the overall hiring experience is really, really quick, I think because of that added competition. And so something with remote hiring is how do you continue to be super fast, super lean? How do you make sure you have the right assessment framework so that you can still make a good quality hire, but by going quickly? And then how do you logistically hire them well? There's also this conversation about, how is your entity set up, and can you hire people remotely, or do you use third-party EOR, employer of record services? I think that's a big consideration that we have to think about in talent teams that are remote. How do we employ these people, and what is compliant from an employee compliance perspective? So,
going in a slightly different tangent, but I also think it's interesting this can happen regardless of you being remote, and probably should happen more, but I think the remote context pushed this more up to the forefront of like transparency in terms of decision making. If you have less of the water cooler conversations or whatever locker room conversations going on, you have to kind of justify and somehow share certain decisions and why certain decisions have been taking place in hiring context or otherwise. And I feel like that's really interesting because a lot of a lot of that has been pushed now more upfront. That said, you could also obviously should be doing that anyway, having a track of your decisions and why you took a certain decision at some point. But
yeah, we received a follow-up question about that. So do you think that having the entire team being remote impacts then the productivity or the bond and comfort within the team? And I think that relates to what you just said, Mia. What do you think about in the future and keeping your team sustainable, having everyone absolutely remotely?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something quite unpopular, and I think it's very hard to, I'm not going to predict the future, right? Like it's such early, I'm just not going to entertain that exercise. But I do think it is challenging, especially for younger people. What I've heard, like also, siblings and, very like next generation down, super challenging a first job coming into a fully remote context. If you are a person who enjoys like heavy people contact, because you don't have the necessarily in the same way a way to learn by secondhand knowledge. Also, those water cooler conversations that I mentioned, I think they do play a big role in like how we back in the how we learn, and now that learning is in a different format. Maybe it's not worse, but I do think it poses some challenges of like, again, just like forcing better communication, forcing more intentionality into how we act at work. So it's I think we just need to like use different gears. But I don't think, I'm not of the opinion that like remote is necessarily like the ultimate answer. It's the better way to go. I think it has certain trade-offs, and we should talk about those like very candidly. Then again, yes, it's also like the current market is what it is, and people want to work remote, and it opens up so many amazing doors in so many other prospects. But I feel like remote in the beginning was kind of hailed as this like answer to all problems type of scenario. And I think we probably all had a sobering moment of like, maybe it's not that, but there are certain benefits, and it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think you need to be intentional about how you manage remote. This is something that I say Hotjar are doing really well as well, because they're remote first since day one. You need to have other processes and other ways, right? You need to have more self-serving material. So your documentation needs to be much, much more structured and well done than if you are in the office, because people need to rely on being able to go to Confluence or whatever tool and finding what they need to be productive. Also, you need to create a culture where not everything is overcompensating by having meetings, right? Because if we don't have the social interaction face-to-face in the office, a virtual meeting is not a substitute, because then you just overload it, look at the screen. So you do need to be very conscious. For example, one of the things we have is like a working together budget. So yes, we are remote first, but we also understand interaction is important, social interaction. So there are meetups, that we fly everyone to a place, that we spend time together, like a week together. Or you can use your budget to go and travel to a city, pay a co-working, work with someone in that city. Or, we gather all the folks that work in Berlin and then we go for a beer. So you still need to have mechanisms to substitute, but I feel like a lot of companies still don't know how to do that, because then it gets overcompensated by meeting, yeah.
Thank you, Carol. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see, we have one here. Do you think that the company's maturity can impact the way that you keep your hiring strategy sustainable, and why?
I think I maybe introduced that term, right? I use it a fair bit, maturity, but yes, I do think it's kind of a pretty important ingredient. Again, just like a little bit of a spectrum of, how reactive versus strategic a talent team is. And I do think on the one end, where you maybe have a more junior recruiter, as like a single recruiter in a small startup that just joined, they may be very reactive and just filling the roles that the team asked them to fill. And that I think is probably a setup where it's much tougher to kind of build this maturity. And then on the other end, you have bigger teams that have more experience, have more specialized roles that can work with data and capacity planning and all of that. So I do think there's a very big gap between talent teams, and also because I feel like a lot of the things we talked about today on the data side have been really only practiced in the last 3 to 5 years or so, and really honed in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, where companies are really hiring very aggressively in a very, very challenging market. So I think it's still kind of a new thing, and there aren't that many companies out there that do it really well.
Mm-hmm.
This is even beyond like the kind of talent function itself, like the maturity of the org. They also, to a certain degree, dictates like the maturity of some of the hiring managers, and I think that also has. I mean, it's a collaboration there. How you make decisions and how you run the process, how collaborative that is.
I also think it's important not to get confused. Maturity is one thing, size is another.
Yeah.
I think that's also very important, because if you have a very large organization that's not mature, then that will be very difficult. So
that
maturity
is correct,
maturity, it comes with maturity. Its size is something else, right? So quite the opposite, companies that grow really, really fast without putting in place the processes to handle that growth, they get really big and very mature, right? So it's like you have, I don't know, a Labradoodle that hasn't been trained. It's just running around the house, biting everyone. It's very hard to control, you know? So I think it's important to do this differentiation.
That is absolutely fair. Yeah, my example was not perfect, because we definitely see companies too where like the first recruiter has more experience or better experience running larger, hiring against larger goals, and then comes into a small company, can really implement really good process at a very, very early stage. So, but yeah, thanks for that.
Great. Thank you all for all of these answers. We will start wrapping up as we are almost done with the time, but I want to thank everyone who's joined and who's contributed with their questions. And of course, thank you to our speakers for bringing those experiences and advice and perspectives. I believe that we can all learn so much from them, and hopefully we can all apply these best practices now that we go back to our day. And remember that if you want to continue discussing on the topic, or you have any other questions, we will soon be sharing with all of you our Talking Talent platform, so we can continue talking about that, and also brainstorming on the next topics. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun.
Bye.
Bye.